And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. For quickness, I took the first or second paragraph of their lengthy bios of all the amazing work that these officials do over the years. I will introduce them all together and then we'll pass the mic and share their proudest moments of the 2018 session and opportunities that they're looking forward to conquering in 2019. Each elected official has been told to prepare 5 to 8 minutes, and if we stay on time, we'll have time to take questions from the audience, so be thinking of those questions. Senator Fain was first elected to the state senate in 2010 and was re-elected to the second term in 2014. He's currently a member of the Ways and Means and Health and Long-Term Care Committees, and previously served as the Vice Chair of Transportation and Early Learning and K-12 Education Committees, and as a long-term member of the Finance, Institutions, and Insurance Committee. Fain also fills the role of Minority Floor Leader after serving as Majority Floor Leader from 2013 through 2017. Senator Kaiser represents Washington State's 33rd Legislative District, which includes a number of suburbs south of Seattle, including SeaTac, the best of Kent, Des Moines, and Burien. During her tenure as an elected official, she has held several leadership positions in Washington State Legislature. Those positions included chairing the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee and serving as leader of the Senate Democrat negotiator on the capital budget. She currently serves as the president pro tem of the Washington State Senate, presiding over the chambers when the lieutenant governor is unavailable. Representative Orwell, for more than a decade, Tina has exemplified her commitment to the most vulnerable population of Washington through her work as an advocate for homeless. As a well-seasoned social worker and advocate, Tina knows the government and private sector must work together to solve our state's significant problems. She created a nationally recognized public-private funding partnership with local government and foundations that resulted in over 1,000 units of housing for homeless individuals, including units dedicated to homeless veterans. Representative Mia Gregerson was first appointed in 2013 to represent the 33rd Legislative District in Washington. As a state legislator, Mia has diligently worked towards protecting voter rights and increasing voter participation, reducing hunger, and helping local food entrepreneurs. Please help me welcome our elected officials from the 33rd and 47th. Down the line.
First of all, thank you, Andrea, and for the Kent Chamber, and for all of you for being here to be interested in your government and what we were up to in Olympia. We had a very intense and short session. We adjourned on time. By the way, my name's Senator Kaiser, Karen Kaiser. And I was really privileged this last year to serve not only as President Pro Tem with the support of my colleague, Senator Fain, but also as chair of the Labor and Commerce Committee. In the world of the Labor and Commerce Committee, I focused on some new legislation I wanted to tell you about that we did get passed into law, and it has to do with sexual harassment. Basically, we passed several bills. They're technical and legalistic, and I don't need to bore you with the details, but if you have either a non-disclosure agreement or an individual employment contract in your workplace or for yourself, sexual harassment and sexual assault will now be waived as a enforceable issue. So it basically says the contract will be unenforceable on those issues. So that's something to keep in mind if you're an employer or an employee with either an NDA or an employment contract. And it was first in the nation legislation, so I'm really thrilled that we got it through. Another piece of legislation we got through that I'm thrilled about is a model policy approach to sexual harassment issues. A lot of employers are not that comfortable or aren't large enough to really dig into the issues surrounding sexual harassment in the workplace. The Human Rights Commission in our state is going to be convening a roundtable of labor and business stakeholders to develop model policies. Let me tell you, these are growing out of a really difficult situation we had in the Department of Fish and Wildlife last year, and I don't know if you heard about it, but it was found that that department, state agency, had a very toxic sexualized culture. In fact, there was just about a month ago a man convicted of rape in that culture. So we decided we had to take this on full strength and put forward several policies that employers will be able to access after this year. We will be posting the model policies and making them available to all employers. It is permissive, not mandatory, but just a word to the wise, they're really helpful to look at and to consider if you're trying to improve a culture that isn't really where it needs to be. Another bill that we got done this year that I was thrilled to work on is the Equal Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act. And this has to do with gender discrimination in actual pay. We first in our state passed the Equal Pay Act in 1943, which, as usual, is way ahead of everybody else. It came out of the Rosie the Riveter era, actually, of World War II. But we needed to update it a lot. And so for the last 3 years, we've been negotiating on the issue. It wasn't an easy bill to get done, but we did get it done. And I think that it is a big step forward to ensuring that there are methods and steps that people can take, both employers and employees, to ensure equal pay in the workplace. So those are the areas that I focused on in many ways in the Labor and Commerce Committee. On Ways and Means, we work on budget, and Joe and I work on Ways and Means together, and we make sure in the Senate that we take care of our hometowns, and Kent is our hometown. We were successful in the transportation budget to get the Willis 167 roundabout funded, a $3 million project that's been needed and will be able to proceed. The other thing we were able to do in transportation budget that we worked on is some good budget notes on the upcoming interchange between I-5, 509, and making sure that Poulsbo RV and other businesses in the area are not really disadvantaged in that reconfiguration of the intersection between I-5 and all of the upcoming construction on that issue. The one disappointment we had in transportation was we didn't get the car tab cut done. We still have work to do. We were so close. Steve Hobbs, who is the transportation chair, sits behind me on the floor, and every day I would check with him. He said, oh, no. Well, it was up and down like a roller coaster all session. They were very close to that on the 59th day of a 60-day session, but didn't get it done. So I'm just telling people I'm insisting on it next year, because we have car tabs that are really out of line in terms of cost with what the sound transit projects really have to have. So we can adjust that, in my opinion. In the capital budget, we got a couple of little things that I'll let Joe talk about, because we worked on these budget issues together. Thank you.
So, whoa, that's got some volume to it.
Yeah, don't talk too loud.
I won't talk too loud. My name's Joe Fain. I represent the 47th District, which is where we are at right now, all the way out to kind of the border on Maple Valley and down to about Highway 18 in the south. I just want to start by complimenting Senator Kaiser on the work that she did on a lot of those issues that she just mentioned. In particular, it's a little hard maybe to understand what the role of President Pro Tem is, but it's the person who presides over the Senate and makes sure that things are operating smoothly and respectfully in the absence of the Lieutenant Governor. And there was a lot of bipartisan support to see Karen up there as often as possible with the gavel in her hand, because she did such a magnificent job of running the place. Many of us would, hey, can we get Karen up there today? So that was nice. Also on that NDA work that she did, this is a really a big deal. The idea that an employer could and this isn't saying you can't use NDAs in any circumstance, but it is saying that you can't expect an employee to sign away their rights without knowing what kind of grievance is going to be coming against them. You can't say, I'm not going to say anything about something that hasn't happened to me yet. You need to actually be in a situation where that employee has power to engage and to know what their rights are. And so I really do applaud the work that was done on that issue. I was happy to support that. Also disappointed with the fact that there wasn't progress made on the tabs issue. The Senate did pass out a modest reduction earlier in the session, but they just couldn't get quite to the point where the House was willing to act on something. Couple things that I was pleased about with the legislative session. To start where Karen left off on the capital budget, I and a number of us have really been a supporter of finding a way to get more sense of community up here on the East Hill. And one of the best ways we felt that could be done over the last decade is to put groups together to get support behind either a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA. And over a lot of work with the Kent City Council has done a phenomenal job and put resources into that and done a great job marshaling the community. Several $1 million from the state to be able to get that project off the ground. You're going to be able to see construction start fairly soon on an East Hill YMCA, and that's going to be a big deal, especially for all the, there was a lot of discussion about where do we put this. I was really a strong advocate of making sure it was up on the East Hill where you had a lot of young families, a lot of folks moving in, and we wanted to make it close and accessible for the communities that we're really going to value from this facility the most. So I'm really excited that after a very, very long and contentious negotiation on water rights and the capital budget that went well past a year, that at the end of all that there were resources there for our East Hill Y. On a 30,000 foot level, one of the issues that I've been really passionate about that's super wonky but super important is this 4-year balanced budget that we've put in place since about 2012. And it basically says that the state builds 2-year budgets, but when it builds those 2-year budgets, they need to project out an additional 2 years and make sure that the budget that's being crafted balances over that 4-year period of time, because there's a million ways that you can game the system and have new spending bills that don't start until the month following the end of that 2-year cycle, or that you have these liabilities that you push off the books to a later date to make it look like the finances for state government are actually in a better spot than they actually are. This 4-year balanced budget has been a really big passion for those of us that want to see responsible budgeting. And with the change in leadership in the Senate, going from the Republican caucus to the Democratic caucus, there was concern about that. I was really pleased that there was a consensus around preserving that. And while I had some concerns with some other things in the budget, that was in there and protected, and I think that was really important. One other issue that I worked on with Senator Billig, who represents Spokane, in terms of a good government issue, is closing some campaign finance loopholes. And again, another esoteric issue, but it turns out that we had in our laws the ability to essentially for nonprofit organizations that don't disclose any of their donors to anybody to receive a lot of money from organizations, from individuals, many of them out of state. You really don't know where the money's coming from. And then those organizations could turn around and give money to candidates or spend money on behalf of candidates that are running for office. And the only thing that those candidates would have to disclose is that they got a little bit of money from this large, faceless nonprofit. And that created a situation where we saw really millions of dollars flooding from out of state, and nobody really knew where that money was coming from. And if we care about transparency and we care about accountability and knowing who's supporting our candidates, this was a really important loophole to close. And so I was really pleased to be the lead co-sponsor on that with Senator Billig, and to get that issue across the finish line towards the end of session. Last thing that I'll talk about really which is it's a smaller issue in the whole scheme of things. I mean, I was a negotiator in transportation package in 2015 and a negotiator in family leave last year. But there was a little issue that I've had for the last 3 years, and it's about free speech for student journalists. Not going to change the world, but it changes the world for these kids. I went down to Auburn High School in 2016, 2015, and the students there and the students on the newspaper talked to me about this policy that had been adopted in 14 other states, the bluest of the blue states and the reddest of the red states. It really wasn't a partisan issue, and it was about making sure that they had free speech rights in the things that they published. And it was interesting, there was a case out of Kansas where a principal was actually terminated because the student newspaper in an investigation determined that the gal had completely lied about who she was and what her credentials were, newspaper was only able to really pursue this to the fullest extent and find the truth because they had some protections. The thing that I was so passionate about is that these kids were so passionate about it, and these teachers and many retired teachers were so passionate about it. And so that was signed into law just a couple of weeks ago by the governor, and it was really a special moment to see, especially when we're hearing about students and young people getting active all over the country on issues and trying to find their voice and try to find a way for their voice transition to something positive where you can see real results of that voice coming to light. I really felt that this was a good example of that. And I was really proud of these kids for showing up at all the hearings and for sending in letters and postcards to their elected officials. It was a great experience in democracy. So that was a great thing that I appreciated their work on it.
Thank you. I'm Tina Orwell. I don't have a cold, I actually have allergies, so my apologies. It's an honor to represent our community in Olympia, and it's an honor to work with my colleagues up here. They all do amazing work. It was a short, intense, and productive session. I really am proud. We got a lot of great things done. I'm going to highlight a few things I was especially proud of. I've worked on foreclosure for many years, and it hit our area really hard, and it was interesting as we started looking at issues. One of the things that happened is we often have abandoned properties, and the cities approach me really not knowing what to do with these kind of blighted communities. And so we worked for about 2 years together with the cities, the homeowner advocates, and the banks to see how could we set up a process where we could get those properties cleaned up more quickly. So thanks to just an incredible team of people, we were able to move a bill, which was like the second to the last bill the governor signed, which is so happy when they signed the bill, which will help those partnerships. And so cities can go in, they can identify these abandoned properties. If the banks don't clean them up, they can clean them up, and there'll be no limit on the lien, which means they can clean them up fully. So hopefully that will make a difference in our communities. One of the things I work on is mental health and suicide prevention. There were many important bills passed this session, and it's so important. We really have an epidemic going in our state, and one of the really high-risk groups are actually young adults between the ages of 14 and 24. We lose 2 to 3 a week in our state, and also veterans. We're losing a huge number of veterans, and so one of the bills that I teamed up on with Forefront and with Senator Brown was around higher ed. And I know higher ed's in the room. I know Renton Tech and Green River. You guys are wonderful. It was a couple years of work together to decide what we do. Right now, a lot of our community colleges, our 4-year institutions have very limited mental health capacity. And so within this bill, we're going to be setting up training materials on suicide prevention. We also have grants. It's $500,000 of grants, which colleges can come and team up to see how they increase their mental health capacity. So agencies like CMAR are excited to start working with our colleges, and they want to be part of the answer as we look at what we could be doing on our colleges to save lives. Really proud of that. And the opportunity we have is also we need to do more work in K-12. It really hit me last week in Renton. They lost 2 teachers to suicide last year. And they had one elementary class last week where 4 students were suicidal. And, there's really, we need to get a handle on this. We need to get much more support into our schools, to our teachers, to our families. So hopefully I'll be working with OSPI on a very large bill to support K-12 for next year. One of the things I also work on is supporting survivors of sexual assault. We had a number of untested sexual assault kits in our state. We thought it was 6,000, now we know it's 10,000. The legislature has been great at giving resources to move forward on the testing. This year we made some progress. We were able to get 3 additional staff at the State Patrol dedicated to testing kits. That now makes 10 staff. That will be their full focus. Hopefully next session we'll go back and get the remaining dollars to finish testing. But it is interesting, I have to tell you, meeting with the State Patrol, they have tested, I don't know, it's like 400 kits so far, and 20 to 25% have hits, which means they're serial offenders. And it really means that there's people that have harmed people in our community that really have not been held accountable. And so I'm really hoping, like in the other states, that we can go forward and investigate and really get some of the dangerous folks out of our community. One of the disappointments in the session was around the property taxes for me, because people are struggling. Our families are struggling. It was a huge increase. I was very thankful we were able to do a bill that will do a one-time reduction of the property taxes next year. But I'm especially worried about people on limited income or families that are struggling. I know in Des Moines, we're arguing about how to say Des Moines, but it was like a 21% increase. And so, I just know people are being hit by this. So again, I think we're going to need to go back next year and address it again. And so those are some of the things I've worked on. But again, it's an honor to serve, and look forward to your questions.
So one of the things about, my name is Mia Gregerson, I represent the 33rd District, and thank you for letting me be here today, and it's a wonderful time to come and see everybody face to face after being in session for so long. One of the things about being last is I get to talk a little bit about maybe what we're doing as an institution. Sometimes we talk about all these different laws that we're doing on behalf of, but there are some things that we're trying very hard to do as an institution, and one of them is how do we have thoughtful processes and policies around sexual harassment within government? We work with staff, we work with lobbyists, we work with media, and it's a very uncharted place to be able to figure out how to change that culture. And so I want to make sure everybody knows here that we're very committed to that. One of the other things that you probably read in the press this year was the DOL sharing of data, the Department of Licensing. And that was very concerning for many of us, especially communities of color. And so we're doing a lot of work and really looking at the processes, working with the director, putting pressure on the governor to make sure that we're not taking more information than is necessary. That sites, especially Department of Licensing in Kent, has been one of those sites that continuously gets complaints about being mistreated when they go there. That is another thing that we're working on very diligently. And then as you saw too, most recently, the opt-in part of voter registration, when mostly women who change their name, they go into the Department of Licensing and they opt in to update their voter registration. And about 6,000 to 7,000 registrations were not actually processed all the way through. So they did not receive a ballot. And of course, in Kent, we just barely passed that bond, and that was something that we were very concerned about. So those are some of the commitments I know that we have very quickly. I'm very happy to say that we did pass a whole suite of bills, not only to work on housing and homelessness. There's like 8 pages worth of bills, and we could go in more detail about that. But again, a huge commitment, recognizing that it's hard to have successful businesses, successful schools, lots of job creation when people are really just trying to make sure that they've got food on the table and a roof over their head at night. And the last thing is the whole suite of democracy access bills. There's actually January 16th is the Good Citizenship Day, and on that day, social studies teachers and school communities will be working to register 16 and 17-year-olds so that they're ready to go to vote or be registered to vote when they turn 18. We have the opt-out rather than the opt-in when you go to do your driver's license change or your address change. And then, of course, the Voting Rights Act, which is something that we've been working on for about 7 years, and be happy to meet with anybody that has concerns about that. But that's been a real big process, and I appreciate all the partners here that have been at that table for many years. So with that, I think I'd like to just end, because clearly we could talk for a long time, but I bet there's questions.
Andrea wants the mic back.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes to take questions. So Cindy's got the first one.
Hi, Cindy Cameron, and I actually work for Fairway Independent Mortgage, Tina. And one of the questions I want to say first, thank you for working on the property tax issue, because it's a very big issue. Not only are people who are low income, and we're focusing a lot on trying to help low income borrowers, or people so they don't go into homelessness, but the other big concern is first time home buyers. So with property taxes going up on average $500 and more a year, that's making it so that people who are trying to buy their first home are unable to buy their first homes. And especially those on the limited income and those who are coming into our area who are from other countries, they can't be competitive, and they cannot get their offers accepted because the housing prices are so insane. So there's a couple of different questions where, one, we really have to work on that property tax issue to help not only low income but first time home buyers. But the other question is, and maybe this isn't down your what you can do, but working with Washington State Housing Finance Commission, they haven't increased their minimum or their maximum amount of income. It's an income limit, and if you make more than a certain amount, which now is $97,000, and that sounds like a lot of money, But to somebody who's trying to buy a $400,000 house, which is what you have to buy now to be a first-time home buyer, $97,000 is not enough, combined with what the interest rate is for what they're going to give the borrower, which is 5.5 to 5.75 to buy a house. So all those things combined are making it extremely challenging for first-time home buyers.
Yeah, right.
We certainly can look at that. I work really closely with the Housing Finance Commission, and it sounds like my colleagues in the Senate will join me, and we will address that.
Okay.
Anyway, I do think there's a lot of work to be done on this. Thank you.
Okay.
Any more questions? No? Oh, come on, I know. All right, Mike.
I'll ask a mean question. What was the thought with not disclosing your information?
The Public Records Act.
Yay.
Sorry, I'm just curious.
No, this was an outrageous situation, I have to tell you. The Public Records Act was passed in 1972, before email existed. Okay, and before a lot of other communications existed as well. And it applied literally to the executive branch of government. It does not apply to the judicial branch, and the legislature did not believe it applied to the legislative branch. The law was passed by initiative. Initiatives are often fairly crude tools. We tried to craft a law to create a Public Records Act for the legislature that was specific to the legislature. And that was taken on by the media as an exemption to the Public Records Act, which it wasn't. It was an addition in fact, because the interpretation was that the legislature was not covered by the Public Records Act. But to kind of bring it down from the 30,000-foot level, we get emails from constituents who share personal information, private information about their health and their families and their children and problems they're having. Sometimes we can help them with state agencies and services. And I think those emails should be confidential. I do not think they should be subject to somebody rummaging around my emails who wants to try and play gotcha or who wants to run somebody down. So I'm very concerned about constituent emails that are confidential in my view. I used to be a reporter, and when I had sources, I kept my sources confidential too. And I consider those source informations. Secondly, in a practical sense, if a lobbyist wants to kill a bill, one of the best things they could do is file a Public Records Act request of a legislator they know is working on that bill and find out what they're saying or what they've said to other lobbyists. So it is a tactic that lobbyists could employ because public records requests are not limited to media. Anybody can make one. And so there's a game-playing aspect in terms of lobbying that could be used if they had total access to our emails. And then sort of the big issue is all public hearings, all records, all actions of the legislature are already public. We don't have secrets. We really don't. We're very open. And if you want to rummage through personal emails and go into that level of detail in public records, it will be, I think, a harm to our community, and it would also cost a fortune. I had a request from a lobbyist for the medical marijuana community just about a week ago. No, I mean about a month ago, and I just met with him this morning. I asked staff what it would cost in terms of time to run down what he was asking for, which was 2 years of emails on any topic having to do with marijuana, which is one of the topics of the committee I chair. And staff suggested it would take 3 full weeks of their time to go through everything and to sort it out. So that's another question, is how much staff time, that's state employee staff time, can we dedicate to searching down records requests from anybody who wants to ask? I just met with that lobbyist this morning in Kent and told him the facts about that. I'm happy to work with him on the issue, but running down a public records request for 2 years of meetings on an issue that he wants to lobby about, really? Seriously? So those are just some of the thoughts I've had about the Public Records Act. It was, I believe, misportrayed by the newspapers who took it on as a holy war, in a sense, as an almost a lobbying effort on their part, but they're not registered, of course, as lobbyists.
So I think I have, there are a number of things that Karen was talking about that she's correct about, which is this, what is the line that should be drawn about the privacy of individuals to contact their elected official? And I think there's a really important policy debate to be had on that. And the reason that I voted no, and was one of the few that voted no on the bill in the first place, if we're going to have that conversation and we're going to go through all of the elements that Karen just talked about, we should do it in a open and transparent process where we actually make the case and convince the public that we're acting in the best interests of the public. And I think the rushed nature of it, the really unprecedented speed in which the bill was passed, I think signaled to the public that maybe this wasn't acting in the best interest of the public. And so that was one of the reasons that I was opposed to it. But I do think that we do need to have a conversation about what type of access they should have. The interesting thing here, a couple other elements. This came about because of a lawsuit that was brought by the media and the AP, and there was a victory at the Superior Court level that reinterpreted the traditional interpretation of the public record statute to make the legislature, make it apply to the legislature, and essentially turn every individual legislator into its own agency. Now, that doesn't make a ton of sense, but there's a way to, with a piece of legislation, adjust it, make sure that there's a central records officer for each legislative branch that handles public records requests. But that still leaves us with the fundamental process of saying what should be public, what shouldn't, what are the proper exemptions that should exist. And we've had in our state a Sunshine Committee that has hundreds of exemptions that they analyze on a regular basis to determine whether or not there are proper protections, social security numbers, phone numbers, GPS data on police cars, those kinds of things have been analyzed through a public process, and the legislature has decided that they should be shielded for a fundamental interest. And I think we can go through that same process with the government records that are held by legislators, and then that should lead to a consensus around that. The last element that I think is interesting is that cities have been screaming for relief for years. And because this hasn't been traditionally interpreted as applying to the legislative branch, and the legislative branch hasn't wanted to pick a fight with the media, they've not taken very significant action for some of the, on behalf of the cities that are getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars of public disclosure requests, some of them incredibly warranted, some of them that could be pretty accurately portrayed as harassing, or a cottage industry to collect on the fees that are made available by the fact that a city might not be able to respond in time. And because there hasn't been as much willingness on the legislative part to pick that fight in a public way, you probably saw a lot of city officials when this happened go, ha ha, now you'll know how it feels. But also maybe that now means that we can have that conversation and figure out a place where the press feels that they are having access to the information that matters. The public has that same access. These aren't our records, these are the public's records. And then we can do it in a transparent and open process.
Yeah.
I also voted no. I was, 2 reasons. I was, one, concerned about it not being an open process. Anything that reduces people's faith in government makes me sad, especially during these times. And I think the other thing is I think we should be more aligned with the cities and the counties. But I do share some of the concerns that Karen raised. I get a lot of emails from people who have been sexually abused and other issues, and I do worry about that. And so I do hope, I think we all are glad that it was vetoed, and we have a chance to do a more transparent process where we can have this kind of dialogue.
So I am on the local government committee, and I'm on the state elections and IT committee. So I was in the hearing actually that we had prior to hearing the bill on the floor. And being the newest legislator, things that slide through, excuse me, very fast is not that abnormal. And so I agree that the process wasn't the best, but I also recognize the details of the lawsuit and how it would debilitate us to be able to actually perform if we were each independent offices. And this was actually a step forward in trying to actually create and fund that movement towards being more transparent. The other thing is I've watched for years us try to move forward with the public records support for local governments and for the school districts, and I've watched the fight, and I've seen the fights from media that said, if you did anything, we will sue you. So we've known at the committee level that we were going to get sued early if we did anything that helped the local jurisdictions find any relief. And so that's the push-pull, and that was the risk that we took. So I'm glad we vetoed it also. We can continue to work forward in a stakeholdering group.
Time for one more, Mike.
So, I just want to say you did a heck of a job this year, 66 days. I think that's worth saying in so many different areas. Maybe another tough question, maybe not. Right at the end of the session, you had I-5, what was it, 14?
33.
33, thank you. And the last day it came together to change, well, actually to pass it and then to go back in and amend it. It's secondary to actually passing an initiative. This is the one that has to do with police shootings. And it was a great, I thought it was a great collaboration that Steve Strand brought together, right? Which is all that. But anyway, assuming the Supreme Court upholds your decision, in the ballot initiative process in our state, with a realistic issue that comes to you, how do you see it impacting in the future?
All right, meaty question, you got 5 minutes.
Oh boy. Well, we could have a real nice seminar on constitutional law right here. I was a big critic of the way that this was done in the end, and I don't fault any of the folks that were involved in it because, frankly, I got phone calls back and forth with Ken Thompson here, our chief of police, who I have great respect for. He was really, really pushing for this to come together and wanted the legislature to act and do exactly what it did, and I kept telling Ken, hey man, I agree with you. You guys put together a good deal. You got the people in the room, the police officers and the community advocates from the communities of color. I mean, this was an amazing feat that you did. Darn that Constitution. And I really, really believe that if we have a problem with the Constitution, there's a problem for dealing with it, and going around it is not the right way to do it, because sure, we might think this was a good time to go around it. There was one legislator from the northern part of the state, or the North King County, that said, you know, that this was such an important thing that the Constitution shouldn't get in the way. Essentially was their comment, like, oh, darn it, that's really a scary way to think about the Constitution. So the bottom line was, and not to get too much into the details, an initiative to the people and an initiative to the legislature are very different, and we're probably more used to seeing those initiatives to the people, that you get the signatures and they go right on the ballot. An initiative to the legislature comes to the legislature first. The legislature has an opportunity to pass that into law, where it becomes law, or they can propose an alternative. This is from the direct line language of the Constitution. They can propose an alternative, at which point both the alternative and the original initiative to the legislature go on the ballot, and the public gets to choose between the two, or they can just do nothing, in which case the original initiative to the legislature then goes and appears on the ballot. And what happened in the legislature was a very creative fourth option, which said, let's do two of these at the same time. Let's adopt the initiative so it becomes law, and then we will pass another bill that immediately amends that bill the moment it becomes effective, you know, because everything has an effective date that's pushed off. So the moment it becomes effective, we'll have another bill that we will have already passed that will change that. There is a lawsuit that's been filed. It's being heard, I think quite recently. I think in the end of the month we should have a decision, because this affects whether something appears on the ballot. And I just felt that that was, maybe you could technically create an argument where that's the case, but the spirit was very clear. The Constitution grants 3 options, and 3 options only, and to create a fourth is not in keeping with the spirit. And I think that creates a problem for future initiatives, because if we allow the legislature to make these kind of changes in the same session at the same time, then people are going to not trust the initiatives of the legislature process, and that won't be a tool that we could use in the future. And so I actually, again, really I really feel bad that that was not a policy that I was able to support. It's controversial. There was folks on both sides of it that still were opposed, but I do think they struck a good balance in the compromise. They just couldn't bring it together in a way that I felt met the constitutional threshold.
But I would say that the court decision on this question will be really important. If the court upholds what we did and says it does meet the test, that's an agreement I think that we would all go with. But what I would suggest is that we come back to session next year and work together to make change in our law so that it doesn't happen again. It is a bad precedent. I think we all agree that this is a dangerous approach. But on this particular issue, at this particular time, it may be the best option we had. And a little window at this time for that, if the court upholds it, I'm okay with. But I wouldn't mind closing that window next session.
All right, a big thank you to our speakers for presenting today.